All right. Well, look, welcome to Simon Hill tonight on Next Level Refs. Thanks very much for joining us, Simon.
Pleasure. Good to see you, Ben.
Yeah, you too, mate. It's been a long time between chats, so I really appreciate you spending your time to chat to Next Level Refs tonight. So, look, we'll probably start at the beginning, Simon, but I guess before we do, you don't really need an introduction, but I guess we've been lucky enough in Australia to have some fantastic football journalists, over the years with the likes of the beloved Johnny Warren and Les Murray. But for me, my opinion, the voice of football in Australia is Simon Hill. Like so many people think Martin Tyler in England. For you, you are Australia's Martin Tyler as far as I'm concerned, Simon. And the way that you present the game is fantastic and holistic, which I certainly appreciated throughout my career and even well into retirement. So I really appreciate you joining us, mate.
Thanks. That's very kind of you. Thank you.
Yeah. So look, it's great that we've been trying to build refereeing in Australia because it benefits the game, as you know. And it's really good to get a number of different viewpoints, not just within the bubble of refereeing. So you've been around the game for so many years, covering, way back in Manchester from, your roots. And is that a Manchester shirt I may see there potentially? There you go. I thought you might have put that on tonight. The blue side of the equation there. With your time through BBC. Covering the things like the Euros, the African Cup of Nations, back to the 98 World Cup when you're still in England. And I guess, the Champions League and EFL Championship back in 2002. And then I guess we were lucky enough, if my research is correct, that from 2003 you came out to the good side of the world. And obviously covering things like, the Athens Olympics and, all your involvement in Total Football, 442 magazine. And, I've got to know you through, I guess, the Fox Sports coverage of the A-League once that started. So, obviously you're around during the NSL prior to that. And since then...
Briefly.
Yeah. Well, you and I both. Then on to Optus stuff and working in the K-League and the global game stuff with Broski that I know you've just... taking a little bit of a pivot there, and obviously now with Paramount and 10, covering the A-League and the Matildas and the Socceroos. So I could go on and on and on, but I guess for people that may not know you, if they've probably been living under a rock, it's really good to establish the kind of credibility that you have and the huge standpoint that we put you on, Simon, in the game in this country.
Thank you. That's very kind of you.
Yeah. So look. Let's get straight into it. When and where did you first fall in love with football?
As long ago as I can remember, basically. It's my dad's fault, so you can blame him. He was and still is, at the age of 90, a passionate Manchester City supporter. My granddad was as well. He's no longer with us, of course. And my great-granddad actually played for City even before they were Manchester City. They were known as Ardwick FC, and he played for them in the early 1890s. So
is that right? Wow.
Yeah, it's a family heirloom, or a family disease, as we thought it was for many years, because we didn't win much. And my dad took me to my first game of football in, I'm going to show my age here, 1974, which was City against Ipswich. And really from that moment on, I was hooked, not just on City, although obviously that was and still is my club. But the game itself, and really it gave me an education in many ways, because after I learned all about City, and then of course the Old English First Division as it was then, and why they call Queen's Park Rangers and where is Queen's Park and all that sort of stuff. And then of course City started qualifying for Europe, so I was going to see games against Juventus. Well, who the hell are Juventus? City are they?
What part of England are they from?
So, it started sort of teaching me at a very young age, and I was just endlessly fascinated by the game, particularly its global nature, and still am. And, I've been the luckiest guy in the world to have not only had my dream job, which is what I always wanted to do. Of course,
Yeah.
I'd love to have been a footballer, but I wasn't good enough.
Refereeing.
This was this was the no. I never considered that, to be honest. This was the next best thing for me, and I've been fortunate enough to travel the world to do it and get paid. So yeah, no complaints.
Yeah, it's a wonderful game that we're in, and it does provide amazing opportunities. But you've also got to be good at what you do. So that's obviously pretty clear. Now, obviously, that's how things started. As you said, it started a number of years ago. What's maintained your passion for football right throughout?
I just think the love of the game. I still get excited by watching even non-league football. Man, when I was back home in the UK last year, I went to see 2 non-league games. Just because I like the different atmosphere that provides. I think football has its own very unique culture that, with the greatest respect, I don't think the other sports have to anywhere near the same degree. There's that tribalism, even at the very lowest levels of the game. You still got very passionate supporters about their town, about their club, about their colours. And I just love it because of that, and the fact that it is so interconnected globally. You can be in the farthest outpost of the globe, which, let's be honest, we pretty much are here, save for New Zealand and a few islands. And yet the possibility is there, if you're good enough, that you can go and play against Real Madrid or Boca Juniors or Barcelona or Manchester United or Manchester City. So, I think it's that opportunity and the culture of the game. I often say it's not just what I do. Of course, it's my job and my living, but it's actually a big part of who I am. I can't imagine life without football. And one more thing on this is, and I'm going to sound like a bit narrow-minded here, but a lot of people, particularly here in Australia, I find, I like all sports, and I'll go and watch this and I'll go and watch that. Not for me. I don't give 2 hoots about most other sports, to be honest. I can watch a bit of cricket here and there. I don't mind playing tennis. I like having a hit of golf. But to sit down and watch, nothing gives me the buzz like a game of football does. So, that's just who I am. It's very strongly built into my DNA. As I say, that's my dad's fault.
Yeah, and you hear about that, football's in my blood, and it's very hard to kind of articulate that to someone who, is across those multiple sports or, hasn't seen football, not just from the Australian perspective, but around the world. So I 100% understand what you mean, mate. It's something that bites us and kind of keeps us going. So, so tell us about that move from England out to Australia in 2003. What made you come out to Australia for starters? And I guess a couple of questions in one there, really. What did you notice were the huge differences in the game here once you had arrived?
Well, I came over here January, 2003, as you rightly researched. The year before, I'd spent the best part of a decade at the BBC. And I was pretty well ensconced there, and I was climbing up the commentary tree. I was doing radio commentary for BBC Radio 5 Live. I was doing a bit of television. And then in 2001, a new network started up over at ITV, which is BBC's main challenger. And they set up one of the very first digital arms. I mean, we're used to streaming services now, but in those days, it was very much in its infancy. And ITV set up this platform called the ITV Sport Channel. They bought up the rights to the English Championship, as it's called now, the second tier, and all the lower leagues. They had a bit of Champions League. They had the League Cup, a few overseas leagues, blah, blah, blah. And this was right at the peak of the football rights bubble, not just in England, but around the world, really. So, it was seen as though football was just a really solid investment, whichever thing you punted on. So they paid an awful lot of money for these rights. And unfortunately, they came up. Well, I say unfortunately, I don't regret it, because it actually set me on the path to where I am today. But I decided to leave because I was headhunted by ITV. They wanted me to go over, and and be on their coverage. They offer me a lot more money, which in those days I was like, well, that'd be nice. Can get a nice car and all that sort of stuff.
Yep.
So over I went to ITV in 2001. Unfortunately, the channel lasted only 12 months before it went bust.
Yeah, right.
Because the football bubble burst, at least at the lower levels.
Yeah.
So in 2002, I was out of work. And to be honest, it was a bit of a scary time. I didn't know whether I was going to be able to get back into the industry.
Yep.
I freelanced around for a little while. And as part of my sort of year sabbatical, if you like, actually it wasn't even that long. It was about 6 months. I went over to watch the World Cup in Japan and Korea as a fan.
Yeah.
And tagged on 5 days at the end of it to come and see a good friend of mine who I'd worked with at the BBC called Rob Minchell. Now, he was over here working for SBS at the time.
Yeah, right.
And when I come over to see him, he said, hey, there's a commentary job going here. You should put in for it. And I was like, yeah. Why would they want a guy from the other side of the earth who's, this was my first trip to Australia. Why would they want me? No, I'm telling you, though, you'd be good for this job. And, I can speak to Les and put a word in and try and do this, that, and the other. To be honest, in the end, when I went back to the UK, I said to him, look, I'll send him my CV and a show reel, really to get him off my back, thinking that would be the end of it. So I did that, and to my utter astonishment, within a few days, I got an email back from Ken Shipp, who was and still is at SBS, management role. And he said, look, we're very interested. Would you be keen to come out to Australia? And I mean, my jaw hit the floor. And it was compounded by the fact that at the same time, I was freelancing for Sky Sports in the UK, and they offered me a contract before SBS did. And I'd sort of verbally agreed a contract with Sky Sports.
Right.
They sent through the paperwork, and the SBS thing was bubbling along in the background. But of course, they had to sponsor me to come out here. So there was a lot of paperwork to get through, immigration, health checks, police checks, all that sort of stuff that you have to do when you move to a different country.
Yeah.
And so there was a big crossover, and I had to make a big decision as to whether to turn down Sky Sports.
Yeah.
Even today, when I think about it, I'm like, geez, it was either very brave or very stupid, turning down the preeminent broadcaster in the UK on the half promise of a move to the other side of the earth. But that's what I did. And, thankfully SBS came through. And that was it. I wasn't married. I didn't have children, still don't have children. So I didn't really have any ties in the UK. And I think the ITV experience had probably soured me a little bit towards the industry over there. I was irritated that I'd left a good job at the BBC and then, was dumped out on the dole queue 12 months later. So I was at the stage where I was like, well, stuff it. If I get an opportunity to live overseas, which I'd always wanted to do, then I'm going to take it. So I did.
Well, glad that you did, mate. And Rob must be rubbing his hands together too at this stage. So.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you a funny story about that. Actually, so Rob, who's still one of my best friends, but he's actually back in England now at the moment because his daughter's at university over there. But when I moved to Sydney, he was the only person in the country that I knew. The only person. And SBS, bless them, I mean, they got me my visa, but they didn't help with flights or accommodation or anything. So the first 3 or 4 days I slept on Rob's floor, and on day 2 he dropped the bombshell that he got a job with the ABC in Brisbane and that he was moving the week after. I was like, well, great. One friend in the country and you're leaving me. So talk about being dropped in at the deep end. So then I had to go and find accommodation and buy cars, and I didn't know the value of the dollar. I had to set up bank accounts. It was it was pretty stressful, but good fun at the time. That's
it. And you obviously found your way. So here we are 20 something years later. So and obviously you've come into this new country, the best country in the world, and we'll talk about that later with the Ashes too, no doubt. And you've come from English football, and you've come to a league where, let's face it wasn't a fully professional league, the NSL back then. It was nearing the beginning of the A-League, but you would have obviously been asking some questions of Rob and the choices at the time. But from a football perspective, what were your initial instincts and your feelings in terms of the comparison between English football and what you found in Australia?
Well, look, obviously it wasn't the same level. It's not rocket science to work that out. It was semi-pro, and it was played in summer, so the pace was a lot slower. The grounds were on occasion too big. Still the same story. There were often rugby league lines painted all over it. Still the same story. But I enjoyed it. My job initially when I went to SBS was to work on the Premier League because, of course, they had the Premier League rights. But of course, I was interested in the local competition. So I made it my business to go and watch a lot of games. I bought 3 or 4 books on Australian football before I even moved to this country. I had Johnny Warren, Schiller's Wogs and Poofters.
I was going to say that was the first one in my head.
Ross Solly's book called Shootout, which was all about the politics, which was a real eye-opener, and a lot of which still applies today. And 1 or 2 of the books that I can't remember now, but I made it my business. I went out to watch games at Sydney United, Parramatta Power, as they then were. Sydney Olympic I went to watch, but my local team then, it's not now, but my local team was Northern Spirit.
Yes.
So I used to go on the Bob Bank and watch a couple of games there.
How good was that on a Friday night?
That was terrific. But I mean, by the time I arrived, it was obviously on the wane. So by the second season, my second season here, which turned out to be the last season of the NSL, we all knew it was coming to an end, and you could tell that. It wasn't good. I remember Northern Spirit moving from North Sydney Oval because they could no longer afford to play there. And moving to, I think it was Pittwater Park, Rat Park.
That's right.
Up near Manly or Warringah. And one of the first interviews I ever got asked to do was with Laurie McKenna, who was Northern Spirit manager. And I remember driving all the way up the peninsula and finding this, godforsaken place, which only had one main stand. And there was only one person inside the ground hammering seats into the stand. So I sort of walked across the pitch and I said, "Excuse me, mate, can you tell me where Laurie McKenna is?" And his face turned around and he went, "Hey, son, you found him." It was Laurie.
That's not a bad rendition either. You worked on that one.
So it was, obviously it wasn't the same as the Premier League, but there was still the same passion, albeit in smaller numbers. And I found it, and still do find it, endlessly fascinating, the history of the game in this country and just how fractured and how ignored it's been. I'm not just talking about the NSL, by the way. You can go back 100 to 120 years. I still speak to people here who swear that the game began here in the 1950s. Well, it didn't. No. But people don't know those stories because we've been spectacularly bad at telling them. And there's a lot of other things, obviously, that the prejudice against the game, which we're all aware of. So it was an eye opener. I think the biggest shock for me really was when I was working on the World Game, which was this 6-hour extravaganza on a Sunday afternoon, which again was a bit
fantastic.
Like, wow, how do we fill 6 hours of program? But we did. And Les and Johnny would host these very serious, very solemn panel chats, which largely centered around the politics off the field. And for the first 12 months, I remember watching this stuff going, why are these guys endlessly banging on about politics? What on earth has that got any interest to do for the public? But of course, it's only when you hear a while and the penny drops and you realize that without the politics getting resolved, the on-field stuff doesn't work. And we're still in the same spot. And, I had endless arguments with bosses at Fox in particular. Why are you always talking about politics? Because it needs to be resolved. Until it's resolved, the on-field stuff won't move. Never ending battle.
I guess, with your overseas experience too, what the game can be. And you see those obstacles in the way here, and we think we just need to break through those and really open up the game. And so many people have tried. Well, we'll never stop trying. Put it that way. But that's a great insight, Simon. Now, I guess from that then, and I remember going from the NSL myself and then refereeing with this new league that was going to start up, this fully professional league, going from the Carltons and maybe the South Melbournes that might have been kind of pretty much full-time professional to a fully professional league. What was your feeling around that? Was there excitement amongst the media too? Like, I obviously remember it from a refereeing point of view. So talk us through that time, mate.
Yeah, I mean, I was still at SBS for the first season of the A-League, so I wasn't working on it in season 1, but I was hugely excited by it. All of a sudden there was a TV broadcaster that cared about it, was showing every game. There was support programming around it. The fans turned up in pretty good numbers, particularly in the early stages of the competition.
For sure.
To be honest, I wanted to work on it. I made no bones about it. Now, at the time, of course, I was contracted to SBS, and there was the little thing of the 2006 World Cup, which I obviously wanted to work on. But I was made aware midway through that first season that there was, shall we say, a bit of interest in my services. So, I was keen to go and work on it. That was the sort of thing I wanted to get my teeth into, and I thought it had a really good chance of becoming mainstream very quickly. I mean, it almost did it overnight anyway. Obviously, it's not quite been a smooth ride since, but massive excitement. And I thought at the time, the one city, one club model was the way to go, at least in the first few years. And make them city-based clubs rather than community-based that were centered around a specific ethnic background. Now, whether we've come to a point now where we need to revisit that a little bit and maybe blend the two, I'm sort of the opinion that should be the case.
Which is where the kind of championship is coming in, really. And
that's the first step towards it. There are some obviously very well established historical clubs that have still got a lot to offer. But I think it needed the A-League to broaden that base out and make it more mainstream. And it certainly did that for, well over a decade. Whether we're quite at that point still now is debatable.
Yeah, fair enough. Now, look, we've talked through, some of the A-League stuff. Obviously, you've covered some of the hugely memorable moments, both for the Socceroos and the Matildas in those earlier days too, with that qualification in 2006 or late 2005 it was, and right through up to the Women's World Cup that we hosted here. But and I guess in your travels as well, you've been lucky enough to travel to some far off different places, and so you've seen refereeing here in Australia and right around the world. I guess, what do you reckon are some of the key characteristics that make a good referee?
Good question. To be honest, can I say at the outset, I think the referees in Australia are just as good as any of the others around the world. And we've seen that with Jared Gillett's move from Australia basically to the Premier League almost in one step. So there's nothing wrong with the quality of referees here. What makes a good referee? I think good communication with players. It's a man's game in the A-League. It's a women's game in the A-League women's. They're adults. Treat them as adults. And just try and understand the game, I guess. Don't be... It's difficult for me to say don't overly stick to the rules, because obviously that's what you're there to adhere to. That's your job as arbiter of the game. But I think there's lots of grey areas in football, and the good referees understand that. They understand a mistimed tackle to a malicious tackle because they're experienced enough to recognise the difference. The referees I probably don't like so much are the ones that stick resolutely to the letter of the law. Now, that might get them extra ticks from FIFA or AFC, but I think from a fan's point of view, it sometimes belies a bit of a lack of understanding of what it's all about. And, I can say this as a commentator, because it's the same in commentary. If you make the game all about you, people will pretty quickly get fed up of you.
Yeah.
We're there to complement the players,
Yep.
referees and commentators. Our job is to describe the action and maybe add a little flourish here and there verbally.
Yep.
Your job is to keep the game flowing. And I still believe in the old maxim that the best referees are the ones that you don't notice, because they've just allowed the game to fulfill its potential. So that would be my definition of a good referee. But obviously there's lots of light and shade in there as well.
Yeah, that's right. And I guess the listeners will range from those that are in the league right now to potentially the A-League and A-League men's and women's, and maybe even some of our FIFA people, but certainly down at that grassroots level, whether it's that little 14-year-old boy or girl that's just got into refereeing, or that 50-something gentleman or lady that's still running around in Div 6 at their local ground. It's really great to have that insight from yourself, because obviously referees get into the training of it all. And like you said, there are pressures from all the governing bodies to make sure that certain decisions are given, aligning with the laws of the game. But it's that quantifiable part that you spoke about, trying to understand the game and what does the game need or expect at this time.
As Trebray Delovsky famously said, you've got to be able to smell the game.
He has used that line once or twice before, and I'm sure he'll appreciate that reference too. Absolutely. Look, that probably leads us really nicely, Simon, into the next one around referees are facilitators for creating that environment where players can take centre stage and display their skills and prowess in that safe and respectful manner. What ways do you reckon referees can add to the spectacle? Because as you said, so much can be, if we hold the game too tight, that the game doesn't flourish. If we let it go too much and people are losing legs all over the place. What is it that in that balance that I guess allows the game to be even a better spectacle, in your opinion?
Look, in all honesty, in my interactions with referees, linesmen, lineswomen, you guys are some of the best people in the game. You have a genuine passion for it. I don't think you're doing it for the money. Obviously you get perks to go overseas and work, in Asian competitions, maybe even the top ones work in FIFA, with FIFA. But, I think it's those human qualities of being able to not only understand the game, as I say, but communicate with the players. And when we're talking about fans, it's about clear decision making and making sure that fans who might not be 100% across, particularly the ones in the stadium, what's just happened or as to why that free kick has been given, at least you can be clear with your signals that that's what's been given. There have been one or two refs in the past, not you, Ben, I have to say, but where sometimes I've thought, is he given a penalty here, or is he given a goal kick? Because the signals have been very sort of lackadaisical. So particularly when it's not so bad when you're watching on TV at home, because you can always play catch up, and we can get information from producers and find out if we're not sure why a red card's been given, etc. But when you're in the stadium, they don't always show the replays on the screen either. So you can be left in the dark, and that's not good. Particularly for a league like ours, where we're trying to build a fan base. If fans feel they're being shortchanged at the stadium, they might think twice about parting with their money to go the week after. So, I think we have a duty, all of us, really, to try and put on the best show possible. As I say, I still adhere to the maxim that the best referees are the ones that you don't remember, with the greatest respect. But you can facilitate the good stuff on the field from the players by good, clear decision-making, quick decision-making as well. I know we're going to come on to VAR. Goodness me. I think the worst thing, and I've been in a stadium as a fan many times, particularly in the modern era, when VAR takes 4, 5, 6 minutes, and half the time you're going, what's this for? If you're at home on TV, the commentators explain it to you, hopefully. although we don't always get the best information there either. But
Yeah.
When you're at the stadium, you can be sometimes completely in the dark as to what's going on. You're left there hanging for 4 or 5 minutes. That's not good. Now, I know that's sometimes beyond the referee's control, but really, I think it's incumbent upon the game. You know, I think the A-League has got a lot better at that this season.
Yep.
Decision making's been a lot quicker, and it needs to be that. The Premier League is almost instantaneous. I mean, blimey, how they do it so quickly, I don't know, but I think it makes for a better game. People want to see a game of football flow. That's the beauty of our sport. It flows.
Yeah.
You don't want to be a ref's whistle every 2 minutes.
No, totally agree. And yeah, you're right. And obviously VAR came in after I retired. We had to do it anyway.
Lucky you.
But I guess, yeah, you're right. Some of those advancements in terms of initially the speed took so long and there was a real, emphasis to try and speed that up. And now there is the in-stadium and on TV explanation, I think, which the fans have wanted as well.
Yeah, that's whether we call it an explanation. I think we call it a delivering of the verdict.
Yes. We should issue gavels, you think? Yeah. So look, it is, but I think I guess it's a bit of a philosophy too for referees to understand that we are just part of the game. It's a very important part of the game because if we don't get our job right, and I guess I was probably more of the stickler back in my day. In that,
you still were, Ben.
Yeah. And I guess in terms of some of that mindset, it was some people come to see the players, and if that player gets absolutely butchered and is out for the next 6 weeks, that's not good for the league either. So, but you're 100% right between letting it just go carte blanche and then, but also having it so tight, So, yeah, it is. So, but at the end of the day, it's got to come back to what's best for the game. You're right.
Yeah, and I think with VAR, the new directives this season from John Moss have helped. I think they've erred a little bit more on the side of letting it flow, which I think is a good thing. I think we were getting to a point over the last 2 or 3 seasons where we were stopping the game far too frequently, poring over minute fragments of on-screen detail, a million replays. And as commentators, and I've touched on this before, we're not often always getting that information as to what they're looking at. Now, personally, I've said this a million times. I don't like VAR. I'd prefer to get rid of it. But if we must have it, and it appears that we're going to come hell or high water, because ultimately FIFA want to get it sponsored, which we know what it's all about, then let's hear the VAR discussion. You're the experts, not me. Let's hear you in the VAR booth. Talk us through how you're arriving at your decision. Now, you'll still get fans that won't agree with it.
That's right.
But at least they will have seen the methodology behind how you've arrived at that decision. And I think that would take a lot of the angst out of the game. Why IFAB and FIFA still refuse to do it, I think they are trialing it in a couple of junior tournaments this year. But that's beyond me, because that, for me, if we have to have VAR, is the way forward. And then we all know where we stand, both inside the stadium and watching on TV at home.
And you're right, it is that understanding and I guess that education of the whole football fraternity. Shreby actually had an interview recently with Phil Moss, and they spoke about the time that when I was president of the PFRA, the referees union, if you will, Shreby was running the referees department, and Mossy was the head of the Football Coaches Association. It's something that hadn't really happened before, where we have these elements of our game come together, and it's a two-way learning street, And I remember sitting there with Mossy, and we had the headphones, so he could actually hear the communication on the field and in the VAR box, and it blew his mind. He said that himself, and that's fantastic. That's only one step. Also, from referee point of view, the more we can understand about the pressures on coaches, we think it's cutthroat in refereeing, where we make an error and we're off fishing with our mates the next weekend. I guess in terms of the coaching fraternity, they're out of a job. and relocating and all that type of stuff. So I think the more we understand the different elements, which is, one of the reasons why we're getting you on too, Simon, who you've been able to witness this for many, many years, trying to get our referees to understand the different aspects of our game can only help our game, I think.
Well, I mean, to be honest, and vice versa, we don't often get a lot of feedback in terms of commentary. Now, we might get the odd ref once every 2 or 3 months say, you said this last week and that wasn't right. And then you go, oh, okay. But, quite often these days as well, COVID has changed match commentary. We're quite often remote these days.
Yeah.
So we're not always on site with the referees or the officials. Sometimes we are with the VAR guys.
Yeah.
So we can go and, knock on the door and say, what was that given for? And that's actually been useful on several occasions.
Yeah.
That we've been able to have that physical one-to-one contact to have that conversation, because everybody makes mistakes. Goodness me, us included. On a weekly basis. No, we're all human.
That's right.
So whatever we can glean from what you're doing, because I'm not a referee, I'm not a professional ref, so I've never done the job. So it's useful for us to know as well. And again, I think, to go back to what I said earlier, we're all facilitators. The main players are the footballers.
Yeah.
And that's, that's what fans pay to see. So our job is just wallpaper, really. Important wallpaper, but wallpaper nonetheless.
Yeah, well, it is. And again, look, you're dovetailing well in here into really the next question, in that, the media do play an important role in promoting football in our country.
Yeah.
Now, I guess from a refereeing point of view, we don't understand necessarily what goes on behind the scenes. And hearing you tonight, it's a great little insight into what goes to air from from your guys' perspective, with your executive producers, etc. And at the same time, probably when we've heard stuff in commentary that we thought, oh, geez, that's a bit rough, or that's not right. We probably didn't have the voice back then. In fact, when we started having the referee interviews, it came to that the screen would come in after the game. You'd make a comment to the reporter at the time, and then that would then get reported. And then it was the live interview. And I think I was the first one to actually go on live and admit an error. I think I did one where we got a couple right, but when the proverbial hit the fan, it was right, I've got to go face some music here. Which, I was happy to do, because
I think fans respect that.
Yeah.
Everybody. One of the issues I have with how referees are treated by their own organisations is that they're almost a protected species, and I understand why, because they get a lot of abuse. But I think it would help in some ways if they were more human. And open to those sorts of conversations. Maybe not every week, because you would be then getting a ref on every. Why did you make that decision? Why did you make that decision? Yeah. You don't want that. But I think they're too hidden away in many respects, and they're an important part of the game. I had a radio show, as you mentioned, for 4 or 5 years, and I think I only ever got a referee on once, and that was an ex-referee. That was Mark Shield, I think.
Yep.
So, because they're not allowed to speak publicly, or at least not very often. And I think that's a pity, really, because you've got your own stories, but you've also got your own views on, things that are important to the game. So, yeah, I'd like to see that change a little bit, to be honest.
Yeah, and look, it's also, I guess, quite confronting for referees to start with, to go, well, geez, well, I'm not a media star, and we keep getting told to stay out of the limelight, and which I agree. But there are certain times where you make a decision. You give a red card, there's going to be talk about it. You give a penalty, there's going to be talk about it. And I think it's important too not to shy away from those big decisions, because I think referees sometimes, when in doubt, they err on the nothing. Which is
a good question, Ben.
100%.
Do you think this? I'm fascinated by this. Do you think that referees today, because of the advent of VAR, I'm talking at the top level, obviously, including the A-Leagues, do you think that some referees do shy away from making big decisions because they've got that backup of VAR these days?
Um, I don't think shy away is the right answer, because I guess in the mechanisms behind the scenes, if and again I retired well before that, but if I miss a penalty and I say no penalty live, and you get the call, Benny, come and have a look at this. It's almost the dread, because then if you're overturning your own decision, there are ramifications.
Okay.
The referees are accountable. So if you've had an on-field review, that's seen as a real downer and an impact on your performance.
Okay, that's interesting.
It is. It really is. And sometimes, and Mossy noticed that too, that match that we saw, in that the referee on that particular day had to overturn a yellow card and give a red card. And Mossy said, look at his body language. It's changed. He's kind of stopped talking as much. And, so it does affect the psyche. Yes, I don't think it's a shy away from I guess the emphasis is really as a safety net to cut out those howlers. But then there's also the talk about, well, where do we stop? Well, if the information's there, why aren't we using it? So it's kind of where that line is. And it's a tough one. Like, I guess I wasn't particularly popular in Australia with my refereeing style, but because I guess I didn't shy away from the big decisions in my mind, and I saw that as courageous. Other people saw it as, hey, he's just trying to get the bloody limelight. I hated the limelight because, it wasn't about us. It was about the game. And I think for me, I guess in my mentality, it was if I shy away, I'm not doing the game justice. If I see something and it in my head and my gut set and my training has told me that's a penalty or that's a red card, I've got to follow through.
Again, this is the stuff that fans don't know, that referees, surprise, just like players, have different personalities. Some are courageous, some are strong-minded, some might take it very personally that they've had a decision overturned and shrink. And that's all part of the psychology element of refereeing, which is hugely important, and nobody knows anything about, because we don't know anything about referees other than turning up for the 90 minutes on a Saturday and booing them. That's all we know. And this is, I've called for cultural change in the whole game's approach to officialdom. I think Pierluigi Collina was the first to come out, I think it was about 2 years ago, and he said, we have a problem in this game. And I was like, hallelujah. As somebody finally recognized that every country in the world thinks their refs are crap. So are we just, somehow cursed in the cosmos that it's only our sport that globally has a collection of incompetent or corrupt officials? It can't be that. It's nonsense.
No.
So, there are very good referees. You wouldn't get, and I said this on X the other week, I think PGMOL in the UK put out a tweet about 4 of their officials that have been selected to officiate at in the latter stages of the UEFA Champions League. And they had to turn off the comments because they knew they would just get thousands of pieces of abuse. I retweeted this and said, imagine being so good at your job that you're not only picked to do the best games in England, but you're selected to do the best games on the planet in the Champions League, but your employer can't make it public with comments because they know that they'll just get abuse. Why are we not having that conversation as a sport? Because, and the reason is because fans have been conditioned largely by the media, but also by coaches and players, it must be said, into turning referees into the scapegoats. Scapegoats for relegation, scapegoats for losing cup finals, scapegoats for goals that should have been allowed that weren't, or for handballs that were missed, everything. You're the easy target because you're never allowed to fight back.
Exactly.
So, and until we have a complete cultural sea change in our sport, it's never going to be any different. But nobody wants to have that big conversation. One last point on this, sorry, and then I will shut up, I promise.
No, not at all.
I once said to Chris Griffiths-Jones a few years ago, how about me and you do a promo video for TV that turns the psychological tables as to how a fan thinks. You'll be refereeing, I'll be commentating, and a couple of fans will be behind the goal, and a few of them behind them are singing, but they're not. They're not joining in. So I leap out of the commentary box. He runs off the field of play, and we stand in the face of the fans going, "What are you doing? You don't know what you're doing. You're not a good supporter because you're not doing your bit. You're crap. You should be sacked as a fan." And I thought that would be a really good way of getting that message across that, you wouldn't do it to a fan. So why do you think it's okay to do it to a referee?
Yep.
But fans do every week.
Yep. And Simon, look, that's one of the main reasons why we got you on, because that is something that you understand holistically, and that again, without referees means we can't protect the players.
100%.
We got involved.
We lose in every year.
That's right. That's right. And it is easy to put on a referee's course and pump 100 people through, but how many of those do we hang on to? And the human resourcing that goes into train them.
And it's the same around the world.
That's right. And irrespective of the sport, sadly, ours cops it, our sport cops it, and I guess our referees cop it. But I guess that's why things like this are so important, that we have this dialogue rather than a monologue, that we all have that responsibility to kind of promote refereeing. And I know exactly what you mean around the PGMOL trying to, we won't promote our referees doing really well because they'll cop a heap. And I remember when I retired, I didn't want it public at all because I knew what was going to come my way. And not so much for me, like I'm big enough and ugly enough to cop that.
Yeah, but it's for your family.
Well, my family, yeah, but actually for that little 14-year-old ref who's just started. And we want them to have that, like we spoke about you being bitten by the football bug. Referees, that's it too. And the longer we can keep them hooked to our beautiful game, the better our game's going to be. So yeah, that's part of the amazing stuff. That's in our game, but we all do have that responsibility. Referees too. Sometimes we don't do ourselves justice as well. So,
and commentators cop it to a certain extent as well. It's not as bad as refs. Yeah. But we copy, and it's the same story of you're biased towards it, you're biased towards that team, and I'm like, well, yeah, but I have zero impact on the game. Even if I stand there for 90 minutes chanting, "Come on, Brisbane or Melbourne or Sydney," it has zero impact on what happens on the pitch. But obviously, your job does, and it's so much more important because of that. But I'd just like to see the rhetoric dialed down a lot from supporters and from coaches and players. They set the example.
Yeah.
But until proper action is taken by the governing bodies, and I know we've had at various points respect campaigns. I'm not sure they did a huge amount of good. This needs to come from the top for me. It needs to come from FIFA. There needs to be a global clampdown on this abuse, and a realization that without referees and linesmen, there isn't a game.
Yeah, that's right. And that we want to be part of it. And yes, we'll make errors, the same as that striker will put one over the crossbar from 6 yards, and that's acceptable. The same as a referee will miss a penalty or give it.
He was in the right place to miss it.
That's right.
Yeah.
Exactly right.
Nobody says that about you, Paul Doggers, do they?
No, that's it. That's it. It's the 89 minutes of perfect refereeing, and that's the dodgy pen in the 90th is the one you're remembered for. So. Yeah. But yeah, look, it's great talking about that too, Simon. And I guess from a refereeing point of view, sometimes we think, oh, geez, are the commentators told to bloody ham it up and really have a crack at the referees because it's going to create clickbait?
I can tell you honestly, I have never once in my career had an instruction from a producer to have a go at a referee. It comes about from the animated discussions that we're seeing on the field because a decision may be contentious. Of course, the media these days, has multiple camera angles and all sorts of whiz-bang technology to be able to replay and freeze frame and zoom in and zoom out, all that sort of stuff. That's where that's come from. But in terms of, is there a let's get the ref? No, never in my experience. I know some commentators do and have gone after refs. We won't mention any names, but for me personally, I've always tried. I've not always succeeded in commentary to, give the benefit of the doubt if you can. You can offer an opinion. If I think your decision's wrong, I'll say that. But you don't spend the next 30 minutes berating the ref for that one decision that he might have got wrong.
Yep.
Because there's still another 89 minutes, 50 seconds for the footballers to do something about it, which often gets forgotten about.
Yeah, and again, Simon, I think I'm not just speaking for myself here in terms of the respect that the referees, our refereeing body has for yourself, because you do understand that. And, you know, I'm sure there would have been plenty of games where you've looked at, oh, Ben Williams, what's it, you know, I can't believe he's missed that, or he's given that, has he, you know, and it's not talking about me, it's talking about the decision, you know, and people have. That's why our game is so great. It's got so many opinions. You know, and that's fantastic. I guess the bit where it turns a bit personal is where it's hard because, and again, not the thick skin that we develop at the elite level. It's not about us. It's about that next generation going, geez, do I want to subject myself to that? No, I'm out. You know, and I guess that's the part around that. And I guess, you know, if you're running master classes on commentary, you know, it'd be pretty fantastic, I reckon. So, look, in terms of refereeing, what do you think the strengths are in Australian refereeing? Not necessarily the personalities, although we do, you know, we've had you've mentioned a couple of them already in terms of Shieldsy and Shreby and Jared now, you know, flying the flag over in England. What are our strengths? And I guess what are the areas for improvement that you see from where you sit in the complex?
That's a good question, because as a commentator, you know, normally for the 90 minutes, the referee is in peripheral vision.
Yep.
You know, he's there, obviously, and you know he's got to make the decisions, but he only really comes into play. You don't study his form, if I can put it that way.
Yeah.
Because obviously I'm watching where the ball is and I'm thinking about, you know, the striker or the defender or how the team's set up.
Yep.
So yeah, strengths is and weaknesses is a very difficult one. Again, I can only really talk in generalities, and I think generally Australian refs are top quality. For me, I can't say that I look at a game and look who the referee is and go, oh, geez, this is going to be this could be a struggle today.
Yeah, I've retired now, so
yeah. But you know, there are even throughout the generations of the A-League, you know, Mark Shield is obviously very well respected. I think one of the biggest strengths, and I've found all of the referees to be very approachable. You know, even the refs that are supposedly, you know, divide opinion, of which you were one. Let's be honest about that. But you know, I've always been able to have a good dialogue with you, whether I agreed with your decision or not. There was never a problem. Strebre was fantastic with that. Chris Griffiths-Jones was fantastic. Chris Beath was fantastic. All the modern day refs, even though I don't know them as well, by virtue of the fact that we're not always on site. But there are still some that I do know. Daniel Elder will send me a text occasionally, or Alex King. What did you think about that decision? So, you know, there is a dialogue between us in the media and the referees, probably more so than the players, to be honest. Whereas, you know, they seem to respect our opinions on the game, and we obviously certainly respect the refs because, you know, you're the experts on the laws of the game. So I wouldn't sit here and be so arrogant as to say, oh, well, this is a weakness that you have to solve. I think generally my issue with officialdom has been more at the higher level, and it's to do with VAR. And really my beef is that they've taken that authority away from the referees. Again, I think you'll know this better than me, but the stats show 96% of decisions during a 90-minute game made by a referee are correct.
That's right.
Goodness me. Imagine being that good at your job and people still thinking you're crap. You only make 4% of errors. And, you know, that's an average. So some of those games are going to be higher than that. Now, okay, if it's a big error, then it's going to come under the spotlight. That's natural. But, you know, you're pretty good at your jobs. The issue is that you don't get the credit for it because the whole conversation around officialdom is warped, and that's what needs to change. I actually think in Australia we're probably better than most countries. You know, it's not too bad. But I can still remember back in the day, Perth Glory coming out and saying, we're not having Jared Gillett refereeing our games because of what happened in the ground fight. Shut up.
Yes.
Shut up.
Yeah.
You don't get to make those decisions.
No.
And I know that there are certain clubs even today that will whinge about certain referees when they're appointed to their games. Well, that's playground stuff.
Yes.
Put your toys back in the pram and get on with the game.
Yep.
Our refs and lineswomen are fine in this country. They do a great job. Yes, you make mistakes. So do I. So do the players.
Yep.
We're human.
Yep. No, that's great. Now, look, thanks for that perspective, Simon, and you've been very generous with your time. So, only a couple more questions. Probably another 3 hours or so. But look, you have been fortunate enough to travel the world, broadcasting football. I guess what are some of your favourite memories, football memories, whether it's A-League, Socceroos, Matildas, or some of those far out places? I remember my first trip to Uzbekistan, for example. So you would have as many stories, if not more, than us traveling around. What are some of those great memories and a couple of those really good stories?
A million of them. Going to places that I would never normally visit as a tourist, like Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Honduras, Vietnam, all over the Middle East, Saudi, which was eye-opening.
Yes.
Lebanon, just after the outbreak of the war in Syria and all the accompanying accoutrements that went with it.
Yeah.
Lying, I think, on my back in the Dead Sea in Jordan the day of a World Cup qualifier and thinking, I've got to go and call a game of football in half an hour. What a life I've got. So there are all those lovely moments. I'll give you a refereeing story. You might like this one.
Awesome.
So many years ago, when I first started out as a commentator in England, I did an FA Cup tie between Hitchin Town and Hereford United. Now, Hereford United in those days were the league club, and they were the club that I was covering at the time. Hitchin were non-league, and Hitchin were 3-2 up as they ticked over into stoppage time at the end of the 90-minute. Big cup shock. There were 3,000 people there all ready to invade the pitch. Anyway, Hitchin scored a fourth, and there was a pitch invasion. And the referee blew his whistle to try and get the fans off the pitch. They all thought that was the full-time whistle. Mayhem ensued. Hereford were furious because there was still 4 minutes of injury time to play, even though there were, 2 goals out.
Yeah.
And a few weeks later, the Hereford United CEO, a guy called Robin Fries, sadly no longer with us, got charged by the Football Association with bringing the game into disrepute because he smashed the life out of the referee, said he was useless, blah, blah, blah. So I got called to go and give evidence because I was commentating the game. I was nervous as hell. Anyway, the referee got away with a slight slap on the wrist, but as he came out of the FA hearing, you'd obviously seen me giving my evidence, which was in favour of Robin Fry and Hereford United. And he was a bit cocky because he'd got off, and he sort of winked at me and smiled and went, "Oh, I remember your name when you're commentating in future." And off he went. His name was Graham Poll. Now, many years later, fast forward to 2006.
Australia-Croatia.
Australia-Croatia. And when he issued those 3 yellow cards to Josip Simonic and didn't send him off. And at the time, I was commentating thinking, have I got this wrong? Have I written something down incorrectly? And of course it wasn't.
Yeah.
It was Graham Poll. And I always remember thinking afterwards, that was a bit of karma for you, Sunshine. Because you were a bit arrogant with me all those years ago. And now I'm commentating a World Cup and you messed it up.
Famous, it's chaos in Stuttgart.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
There's lots of refereeing story for you.
That's certainly one refereeing story that gets relived a number of times too. Yeah. So I didn't have that background though. That's very interesting. Look, Simon, what's your favourite memory of football in Australia? Whether that's the national teams, or the A-League. If you flew back to the UK today and they said, right, tell us your favourite thing that's happened in football, all Australian football, what story are you telling?
I think if I can have two, one professional, one sort of personal.
Yeah.
Professionally, I'd have to say it would be the 2006 World Cup. Just because it was obviously the first time Australia had been there for 32 years. It was my first World Cup calling Australia at a World Cup.
Yeah.
I managed to be fortunate enough to, call the nation's first ever goal at a World Cup finals and a first ever win in that game against Japan, which is very special.
Oh.
So that whole tournament really was wonderful to experience in that role. So that would be the outstanding. I mean, so many others, but in a personal sense, I think just having the opportunity, firstly, to travel the world with the Socceroos and go to all those crazy countries has been such a privilege and such a fantastic, life-changing experience for me. But also being in the privileged position of being able to try and help this game grow here. I don't know whether we've succeeded, but I worked for 10 years in the UK before I came over here, and I loved my job. And I people forget I had a career in the UK before I came here, and I did okay in that job. But the game in England didn't really need people like me. I was an accoutrement to it. Whereas here, you are an essential part of it because everybody has their role to play, particularly in the media when there's so few of us. So to be, given that honor of being a voice of the game and try and hold people to account or praise, critique, try and drive the game forward in our own small way. I think that's probably been the biggest privilege over the last 20 years. I didn't know it when I arrived. I didn't know that was going to be the case, but that's the way it's turned out.
Well, there's no way you could have. And, just like your book, just gob on a stick. Simon, it's been far more than a gob on a stick for me. And those memories that you talk about, it gives me goosebumps to, just feeling that, as a fan of Australian football, aside from being a referee, your voice talking through those moments, that have gone down in history. So on behalf of the football community, thank you very much. And, for your time tonight, it's, probably gone longer than what we thought, but we could sit down over a pint and talk many more football stories. But on behalf of Next Level Ref, Simon, look, thank you so much for your time. We'll keep fighting the good fight and really appreciate your time, mate.
Thanks very much for having me, Ben. And the fact is, it's the first time I looked at my watch, so we must have been enjoying ourselves.
Absolutely. Thanks, absolutely. No, I appreciate your time, mate. And take care, and we'll be in touch again soon.
All the best, Ben. Thanks.
Awesome. Thanks very much, mate.